Frank Lucas sat in room 312 of the Teresa Hotel on 125th Street in Harlem, counting money. According to multiple sources, including Lucas' own lot, a testimony to federal prosecutors, he'd been skimming from Bumpy Johnson's operations for months. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there from collection houses, then larger sums as his confidence grew, and consequences appeared. Various accounts suggest Lucas had taken somewhere between $30,000 and $75,000. The exact figure has never been verified and likely never will be. Lucas himself gave wildly different numbers in different interviews over the decades. In an interview with New York Magazine, he claimed it was maybe 20 grand. In his book, Original Gangster, he wrote it was over 50,000. In an interview promoting the film American Gangster, he said it was nothing, just expenses I was owed. What remains consistent across all sources, including law enforcement records? Frank Lucas took money that didn't belong to him from a man who had built a 40-year career on never forgetting debts. Bumpy Johnson was 61 years old that spring. He controlled Harlem's underworld. Since the early 1930s, multiple former associates interviewed by researchers described him as slowing down physically but remaining sharp mentally, less involved in day-to-day street operations, more focused on legitimate business ventures and political connections. FBI surveillance reports note that Bumpy was spending more time at his apartment on Lenox Avenue and less time making rounds of the various operations he controlled. One report states, subject appears to be semi-retired, less street activity observed. However, informant's repo, his control over Harlem operations remains absolute. Frank Lucas was 37 years old. He'd been working in Bumpy's orbit since the early 1960s, though exactly when and how he started has been disputed. Lucas claimed in multiple interviews that he met Bumpy and immediately became his driver and right-hand man. Court documents from narcotics cases identify Lucas as a mid-level operator in numbers and drug distribution, not a lieutenant, not in a circle, not family, just an earner who handled collections and street-level operations. Former NYPD Detective Robert Loy, who investigated Lucas extensively and later wrote about him in his memoir, All the Centurions, disputed Lucas's self-aggrandizing accounts. Frank liked to make himself sound more important than he was. Lucy wrote, he'd tell people he was Bumpy's closest confidant, his heir apparent. The truth, according to every other source we interviewed, was that in Bumpy's organization, Frank was middle management at best. Useful but replaceable. Detective Raymond Jones, who worked organized crime in Harlem, gave similar testimony in a deposition. Lucas wasn't nobody special in Bumpy's operation. Bumpy had guys who'd been with him 30 years. Frank had been around maybe 5, 6 years. He ran some collections, moved some product. That's it, but Frank had ambition. You could see it, that kind of ambition that makes people dangerous to themselves and others. What we can verify from court records, police reports, and witness testimony, Lucas was involved in the numbers racket and narcotics distribution in Harlem. He had access to money, collection, money, payment money, operational funds, and according to multiple sources, he had a documented problem with discipline and following rules. A federal indictment against Lucas contains testimony from several former associates. One witness, whose name is redacted in available documents, stated, Frank always wanted more. More money, more respect, more power. He'd cut corners, skim a little here and there, keep what he thought nobody would miss. Bumpy knew guys like Frank, had dealt with them for 40 years. He knew exactly what Frank was doing. The Teresa Hotel, located on the corner of 125th Street and 7th Avenue, was famous throughout Harlem and beyond. Open, it had hosted everyone from Malcolm X to Fidel Castro, who famously stayed there during his visit to the United Nations. moving from a midtown Manhattan hotel after claiming discrimination. By then, the Teresa was past its prime, but remained significant. It was where deals were made, where people from the neighborhood who'd made money could feel important, where business was conducted away from prying eyes and listening devices. Room 312 was on the third D floor, facing 125th Street. Hotel records from the period subpoenaed during Lucas's arrest and trial show the room was registered multiple times to various names, several of which investigators later connected to Frank Lucas using false identification. The hotel manager at the time, a man named Charles Davis, was interviewed by police as part of the investigation into Lucas's opera. Ions Davis confirmed that Lucas was a frequent guest, often renting rooms for what he described as business meetings. Davis told investigators he never asked questions. In Harlem, you learn not to ask questions about certain people's business, he said in the recorded interview. Frank Lucas was one of those people. On the night, according to Lucas's own account given to federal prosecutors during his cooperation agreement, he was in room 312 with a substantial amount of cash. The exact amount varied in his tellings. Sometimes $50,000, sometimes $45,000, once as high as $75,000. What remained consistent? It was money he'd been systematically taking from collection houses he managed for Bumpy's organization. Lucas's testimony to prosecutors includes this exchange. Prosecutor, when you took this money, did you believe Mr. Johnson was unaware? Lucas, I thought I was being smart. Bumpy was old. I'd see him, and he looked tired, wasn't running around the streets like he used to. I figured he wasn't paying as close attention. I thought maybe he wouldn't notice some money going missing. Or, if he did notice, he wouldn't care enough to do anything about it. He had millions. What was 50 grand to him? Prosecutor, did you consider that you might be wrong in that assessment? Lucas, no, not until I was. Whether Bumpy knew about the theft immediately or discovered it over time remains unclear. Different sources provide different timelines. Some suggest Bumpy knew from the first dollar Lucas took. Others indicate he didn't discover it until Samuel and he brought it to his attention. What matters? According to the documented pattern of Bumpy's behavior over 4 decades, is what happened once he knew. What happens next exists in several versions, all originating from Frank Lucas himself. This presents a credibility problem that researchers have struggled with for decades. Lucas was a documented, proven liar. His claims about his criminal career have been debunked or disputed by law enforcement, journalists, and other criminals who knew him. He claimed he smuggled heroin in the coffins of dead American soldiers from Vietnam. Investigators found no evidence this ever happened. He claimed he made $1 million a day at his peak. Financial records suggest it was far less. He claimed he was Bumpy Johnson's heir. Everyone who actually knew Bumpy disputed this. So when Lucas tells a story about what happened in or around room 312, we must approach it with extreme skepticism. That said, something happened that night. The behavioral evidence supports this conclusion, even if the specific details cannot be verified. The most detailed account comes from Lucas himself, given in multiple interviews. The story remained relatively consistent, though detail shifted. According to Lucas, he was alone in room 312. He was counting money he'd taken from various collections over the previous months, making plans for how to use it as seed capital for his own operation. Independent of Bumpy, the television was on. In some versions, he said it was showing a movie. In others, the news. In one telling a boxing match, the time Lucas was very specific about in all versions was between 3 and 3:30 a.m. Most often, he said exactly why he remembers such a specific time. He never explained clearly. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, not someone stumbling back from a late night. Deliberate, multiple people walking with purpose. The footsteps stopped outside room 312. Then silence. Lucas claimed he sat frozen. Money spread out on the bed. Listening, the television continued playing. The footsteps didn't move on, didn't knock, just stopped after what he estimated was 2 or 3 minutes. Felt like forever. He said in an interview. Lucas stood up and approached the door, looked through the peephole. 3 men stood in the hallway. Lucas recognized all of them. He named them in various interviews. Though the name shifted slightly, most consistently, Freddie, Bumpy's driver and longtime associate since the 1940s, a man Lucas called Big John, described as one of Bumpy's enforcers, and a third man whose identity Lucas claimed he couldn't remember or wouldn't name. These were, according to Lucas, Bumpy's actual inner circle, men who'd been with him for decades, men who didn't ask questions, just followed orders. Men who, Lucas said he'd seen do terrible things to people who crossed Bumpy. Lucas claimed his blood went cold when he saw them. The phrase appears in nearly every version of the story he told. He didn't open the door, didn't call out, didn't make any sound, just stood there, said to the peephole, watching 3 armed men stand motionless outside his room. According to Lucas, after another long silence, one of the men, he most consistently identified this as Freddie, raised his hand and knocked on the door, not loud banging. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, professional, almost polite. Lucas didn't answer, didn't move. Another pause. Then Freddie's voice, quiet enough that Lucas claimed he had to press his ear against the door too. Hear it clearly. Mr. Johnson says, "You have something that belongs to him." The exact wording of what was said next has varied across Lucas's retellings. In some versions, the message was longer. In others, shorter, the most common version appearing in at least 4 separate interviews. He also says, "You have 2 choices. Open this door, guillotine out and give it back, all of it. Or don't open the door, and we come back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that until you do open it. Maybe we bring more people in. X time. Maybe we don't just knock. Your choice." In Lucas's telling, there was another long silence. He stood with his ear pressed to the door, heart pounding, not breathing. Then the footsteps walked away down the hall. The elevator dinge. Doors opened and closed. Silence. Lucas said he stood at that door for 20 minutes shaking. Then he gathered up all the money, every dollar, put it in a bag, and left the hotel, went straight to one of Bumpy's collection points, and left the bag with a note. "This is what I owe. It won't happen again." That's Lucas's story, the only version we have of what happened in that hallway. This account appears only in Lucas's own tellings, given years and decades after the fact. No other witnesses have ever confirmed it. The 3 men Lucas named in various versions were all dead by the time he started publicly telling this story. Bumpy Johnson himself died 4 months after the alleged incident, unable to confirm or deny any of it. We have no police reports from that night, no hotel records indicating a disturbance, no witnesses beyond Lucas himself. We have no way to independently verify what happened in that hallway or if anything happened at all, but we have something else, something that lends the story credibility despite its single source. We have Lucas's documented behavior before and after former also. Ciatus of both Bumpy and Lucas, interviewed by police during the extensive investigation into Lucas's heroin operation, noted significant changes in Lucas's behavior starting. One witness, testimony recorded in trial transcripts, stated Frank was always cocky, always talking big, flashing money, acting like he was somebody important. Then around March or April, he got real quiet, stopped bragging, stopped showing off, started acting nervous, like something happened that shook him up real bad. Another witness interviewed by Detective Lucy said, "I noticed Frank Chong. Ed, he used to be loud, Always had something to say, then suddenly he's quiet, jumpy, looking over his shoulder all the time. I asked him what happened. He said nothing, just being more careful, but it was more than that. He was scared. Hotel records from the Teresa, subpoenaed during Lucas's trial, show he checked out of the hotel on the morning after the all-aged incident. More significantly, the records show he never stayed at the Teresa Hotel again. Never rented another room there despite having been a regular customer for at least years. Why would Lucas, who had been comfortable using the Teresa as his base of operations, suddenly stop going there entirely? Financial records pieced together by federal investigators from various sources show another interesting pattern in the months before. Lucas's reported payments to Bumpy's organization were consistently light. Collection houses he managed were coming up short, not dramatically, a few hundred or a few thousand here and there, but consistently. After, those same collection houses started reporting higher than expected returns. Lucas began overpaying, turning in more money than as owed. One investigator's report notes, subject Lucas appears to have overcorrected. Collections from houses under his management increased 15 to 20%, suggesting either previous skimming that ceased or overcompliance due to fear of consequences. Detective Raymond Jones in his deposition specifically mentioned this shift. We were watching various Harlem operations as part of our Z crime monitoring. We noticed Frank Lucas' behavior changed significantly. He went from being cocky and flashy to being real careful, real compliant. We figured someone had to talk with him, put the fear of God into him. That's how it works in that world. You don't need to hurt people if the threat is credible enough. Additional context comes from people who know Bumpy Johnson and how he operated. Multiple sources, interviewed by researchers over the years, described Bumpy's approach to discipline as psychological rather than physical. I interviewed with a former Harlem numbers runner archive at the Chamber Center includes this exchange. Interviewer: when someone stole from Bumpy or betrayed him, what would happen? Runner: Bumpy wasn't like those crazy gangsters you see in movies. He didn't just kill people or beat them up over everything. He was smarter than that. He'd let you know he knew what you did, make you understand that he could hurt you anytime he wanted, but he was choosing not to. Yet, that was scarier than getting beat up because you'd spend every day after that wondering if today was the day he changed his mind. Interview: can you give an example? Runner: I knew a guy who was skimming from a collection house. Not a lot, but Bumpy found out. Bumpy didn't confront him, didn't say nothing, just had some of his people show up at the guy's apartment one night. Didn't come in, didn't threaten him, just knocked on the door and stood there. Guy looked through the peephole, saw who it was, and in. Early had a heart attack. They didn't say nothing, just stood there for a minute, then left. Guy brought back every penny he stole the next day. Never stole again. Bumpy didn't have to say a will. This pattern, psychological pressure rather than immediate violence, appears repeatedly in accounts of how Bumpy handled internal discipline problems. Another former associate interviewed described it this way. Bumpy understood that beating someone up or killing them sent one message, but making them afraid, making them think about what could happen, that sent a different message, a longer lasting one. Guys who got beat up once they healed, sometimes they got brave again. Guys who got scared, really scared, they stayed scared. This approach made strategic sense for someone in Bumpy's position. He was running a large, complex organization with dozens of people handling money and operations. He couldn't personally monitor everything. He needed people to police themselves out of fear of consequences rather than constant surveillance, making an example of someone not through violence, but through the threat of violence, through demonstrating that he knew what you'd done and could reach you anytime. Serve as a deterrent, not just to that person, but to everyone who heard about it. And stories like that true or embellished, spread quickly through the organization. Everyone would know Bumpy, knows Bumpy is watching. You can't hide from him. Whether the specific incident Lucas described happened exactly as he told it is unprovable. Boo. The pattern fits. The behavior changes. Documented. The psychological approach matches what we know about Bumpy's methods. Something happened that fundamentally changed Frank Lucas' behavior. Something that made him stop skimming, start overpaying, avoid the Teresa Hotel, and act afraid for months afterward. The most plausible explanation based on all available evidence is that Bumpy Johnson or his representatives confronted Lucas about the theft, not with violence, with presence, with implication, with the clear message that Bumpy knew, could prove it, and was giving Lucas one chance to make it right. Whether it happened outside room 312 or in a different place at a different time, the effect was the same. Frank Lucas understood that he'd been caught. And he miscalculated badly that the old man he thought was slipping was still 10 steps ahead, and that his life depended on fixing the situation immediately. In Lucas's book, he wrote extensively about his relationship with Bumpy, though much of it has been disputed by other sources, but one passage stands out. Bumpy was the only man I ever feared, not because of what he did to people, though he'd done plenty, not because of his reputation, though it was formidable. I feared him because he knew. He knew when you were lying, knew when you were stealing, knew when you were getting too big for yourself, and he let you know that he knew in ways that made you think twice about everything you did after that. Lucas never explicitly mentioned room 31, 2, or the early morning visitors in his book, but he did write this in a chapter about lessons learned. There was a night when I realized Bumpy was always 10 steps ahead of everyone, even when he seemed not to be paying attention. He was. Even when he seemed to be slowing down, he wasn't. That was the night I understood why he'd survived 40 years in Harlem when everyone else died, or went to prison. He saw everything, knew everything, and he'd remind you of that when you least expected it. Bumpy Johnson died exactly 4 months after the alleged Teresa Hotel incident. He suffered a massive heart attack while eating dinner at Wells' restaurant in Harlem. Frank Lucas attended the funeral. Multiple photographs from that day, published in the Amsterdam News and archived in various tie-ins, show Lucas in the crowd of mourners. In an interview, Lucas claimed he was one of the pallbearers and gave a eulogy, though other sources dispute both claims. What's documented? He was there. What happened after Bumpy's death as well? Documented and forms the basis of Lucas' criminal legend. Within months, Lucas began building what would become a multi-million-dollar heroin operation. He established connections for importing heroin, set up distribution networks, recruited family members to work as couriers, and for several years operated one of the most successful drug trafficking operations in New York. Whether Lucas actually smuggled heroin in soldiers' coffins from Vietnam, as he claimed and as depicted in the movie American Gangster, has been disputed by law enforcement and military investigators, who found no evidence supporting the claim. Once verified, Lucas was importing large quantities of heroin from Southeast Asia and making enormous profits. Some researchers see a direct connection between Bumpy's death and Lucas's expansion. With Bumpy gone, Lucas was free to build his own empire without oversight, without someone watching his every move, without someone who knew exactly what he was capable of and kept him in check. Detective Lucy wrote in his memoir, after Bumpy died, Frank Lucas changed completely, went from a mid-level guy to trying to be a kingpin like he'd been, held back, and suddenly the leash was cut. Makes you wonder what would have happened if Bumpy had lived longer. My guess, Frank would have stayed exactly where he was, because Bumpy wouldn't have let him rise any higher. Bumpy knew Frank's weaknesses. Lucas's empire lasted until when he was arrested in a major operation, facing life in prison, he became a cooperating witness, providing information that led to the arrest of dozens of people, including corrupt law enforcement officials. His cooperation, viewed by many as betrayal as snitching, earned him a reduced sentence. He served less than 7 years before being released. He was arrested again for drug trafficking, served another 7 years, and was finally released. He spent the rest of his life giving interviews, writing a book, serving as a consultant for the movie about his life, and generally crafting his legend. He died at age 88. Throughout all those years, in hundreds of interviews and public appearances, Lucas rarely spoke in detail about his relationship with Bumpy Johnson. When he did, he almost always portrayed himself as Bumpy's closest associate, his heir, his chosen successor. People who actually knew Bumpy consistently disputed these claims, but Lucas kept telling his version. The story of Room 312, when Lucasfina started telling it, was different, more personal, more vulnerable, less self-aggrandizing. In most of Lucas' stories, he was the hero, the genius, the one who outsmarted everyone. But in the Room 312 story, he was the one who got caught, got scared, got taught a lesson. That vulnerability, that admission of fear, lends the story a strange credibility that his more grandiose claims lack. Why would Lucas invent a story where he looks weak and foolish, where he admits to theft and cowardice? It doesn't fit the pattern of his usual myth-making. The most logical explanation, something very much like what he described actually happened, maybe not exactly, maybe not with those exact 3 men, maybe not with that exact dialogue, but the core truth that he stole, got caught, got terrified, and never crossed Bumpy again. That part appears to be real. After American Gangster was released, a reporter from New York Magazine tracked down several people who'd known both Bumpy Johnson and Frank Lucas. One elderly man, who agreed to speak only anonymously, provided this assessment. Frank tells a lot of stories. Most of them are made up to make himself look good, but every now and then he tells a story where he looks bad. Those stories, those are usually true. Because why would he make up something that makes him look like a punk? The Room 312 story, if that's what really happened, that's Frank admitting Bumpy scared him so bad he never stole again. That's Frank admitting the old man was smarter than him. That's not the kind of story Frank makes up. The reporter pressed. So you think it's true? I think something like it happened. Bumpy found out Frank was stealing. Bumpy sent a message. Frank got scared and gave the money back. The details, who knows, but the main point, yeah, that happened. The Teresa Hotel was demolished to make way for an office building. Room 312 no longer exists. The building that replaced it has no plaque, no marker, nothing to indicate what may or may not have happened there in the early morning hours. But the story persists in Harlem. Different versions, different details told by different people who heard it from different sources. Some say it was 3 men in a hallway. Some say it was a phone call. Some say Bumpy himself showed up at the hotel. Some say it never happened. At all. What's consistent across versions? Frank Lucas stole from Bumpy Johnson, thought he'd gotten away with it, then received a message. However it was delivered, that made him understand, and he hadn't gotten away with anything. That Bumpy knew that Bumpy was giving him one chance, and that if he didn't take that chance, there wouldn't be another. Lucas took the chance, returned the money, changed his behavior, and never crossed Bumpy Johnson again. For months later, Bumpy was dead, and Frank Lucas, free from the only supervision that had ever successful White controlled him, went on to build and destroy an empire, but he never forgot Room 312, never forgot the feeling of seeing those 3 men in the hallway, never forgot understanding in that moment that he wasn't as smart as he thought he was, And for researchers trying to understand the relationship between these two men, the old legend and the ambitious upstart, that moment, whether it each happened exactly as described or not, tells us everything we need to know. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to kill Frank Lucas to control him. He just needed to make Lucas understand that he could anytime, anywhere. Frank Lucas thought Bumpy Johnson had forgotten about the $50,000 or didn't care or was told to do anything about it. Then, according to Lucas' own account, 3 men stood outside his door, knocked 3 times, delivered a message, and walked away. No violence, no threats, just silence and the understanding that someone knew exactly what you'd done. Fran K. Lucas lived another 51 years after that night. Built an empire, went to prison, became famous, told countless stories about his criminal career. But he never forgot the night he learned that you can't hide from someone who sees everything, even when they seem not to be looking, especially then. If this approach, building credibility through documented behavioral changes rather than dramatic dialogue, resonates with you, subscribe. We're constructing narratives from court records, FBI files, interviews, and patterns of evidence, not Hollywood mythology. Like if you appreciate the difference between Frank Lucas's self-serving legends and the harder truths revealed by how he actually behaved and comment based on the evidence. Do you believe something like Room 312 happened? Oh. Or is this just another Lucas fabrication? More evidence-based investigations into the real Frank Lucas coming soon. The documented truths behind the movie myths.